Section 14 of the Astral Plane, Its Inhabitants, Scenery, and Phenomena by C.W. Ledbetter. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Phenomena continued. It will be readily understood that superphysical forces and the methods of managing them are not subjects about which much can be written for publication at present, though there is reason to suppose that it may not be very long before, at any rate, some applications of one or two of them come to be known to the world at large. But it may perhaps be possible, without transgressing the limits of the permissible, to give so much of an idea of them as shall be sufficient to show in outline how certain phenomena are performed. All who have much experience of spiritualistic seances at which physical results are produced must, at one time or another, have seen evidence of the employment of practically resistless force in, for example, the instantaneous movement of enormous weights, and so on, and, if of a scientific turn of mind, they may perhaps have wondered whence this force was obtained, and what was the leverage employed. As usual in connection with astral phenomena, there are several ways in which such work may have been done, but it will be enough, for the moment, to hint at four. First, there are great etheric currents constantly sweeping over the surface of the earth from pole to pole, in volume which makes their power as irresistible as that of the rising tide. And there are methods by which this stupendous force may be safely utilized, though unskillful attempts to control it would be fraught with frightful danger. Secondly, there is what can best be described as an etheric pressure, somewhat corresponding to, though immensely greater than, the atmospheric pressure. In ordinary life, we are as little conscious of one of these pressures as we are of the other, but nevertheless they both exist, and if science were able to exhaust the ether from a given space, as it can exhaust the air, the one could be proved as readily as the other. The difficulty of doing that lies in the fact that matter in the etheric condition freely interpenetrates matter in all the states below it, so that there is, as yet, no means within the knowledge of our physicists by which any given body of ether can be isolated from the rest. Practical occultism, however, teaches how this can be done, and thus the tremendous force of etheric pressure can be brought into play. Thirdly, there is a vast store of potential energy which has become dormant in matter during the involution of the subtle into the gross, and by changing the condition of the matter, some of this may be liberated and utilized. Somewhat as latent energy, in the form of heat, may be liberated by a change in the condition of visible matter. Fourthly, many striking results, both great and small, may be produced by an extension of a principle which may be described as that of sympathetic vibration. Illustrations taken from the physical plane seem generally to misrepresent, rather than elucidate, astral phenomena, because they can never be more than partially applicable, but the recollection of two simple facts of ordinary life may help to make this important branch of our subject clearer, if we are careful not to push the analogy further than it will hold good. It is well known that if one of the wires of a harp be made to vibrate vigorously, its movement will call forth sympathetic vibrations in the corresponding strings of any number of harps placed around it, if they are tuned to exactly the same pitch. It is also well known that when a large body of soldiers crosses a suspension bridge, it is necessary for them to break step, since the perfect regularity of their ordinary march would set up a vibration in the bridge which would be intensified by every step they took, until the point of resistance of the iron was passed, when the whole structure would fly to pieces. With these two analogies in our minds, never forgetting that they are only partial ones, it may seem more comprehensible that one who knows exactly at what rate to start his vibrations, knows, so to speak, the keynote of the class of matter he wishes to affect, should be able, by sounding that keynote, to call forth an immense number of sympathetic vibrations. When this is done on the physical plane, no additional energy is developed. But on the astral plane, there is this difference, that the matter with which we are dealing is far less inert. And so, when called into action by these sympathetic vibrations, it adds its own living force to the original impulse, which may thus be multiplied many-fold, and then by further rhythmic repetition of the original impulse, as in the case of the soldiers marching over the bridge, the vibrations may be so intensified that the result is out of all apparent proportion to the cause. Indeed, it may be said that there is scarcely any limit to the conceivable achievements of this force in the hands of a great adept who fully comprehends its possibilities. For the very building of the universe itself was but the result of the vibrations set up by the spoken word. The class of mantras or spells which produce their result, not by controlling some elemental, but merely by the repetition of certain sounds, also depend for their efficacy upon this action of sympathetic vibration. The phenomena of disintegration also may be brought about by the action of extremely rapid vibrations, which overcome the cohesion of the molecules of the object operated upon. A still higher rate of vibrations, of a somewhat different type, will separate these molecules into their constituent atoms. A body reduced by these means to the etheric condition can be moved by an astral current from one place to another with very great rapidity, and the moment that the force which has been exerted to put it into that condition is withdrawn, it will be forced by the etheric pressure to resume its original form. It is in this way that objects are sometimes brought almost instantaneously from great distances at spiritualistic seances, and it is obvious that, when disintegrated, they could be passed with perfect ease through any solid substance, such, for example, as the wall of a house or the side of a locked box, so that what is commonly called the passage of matter through matter is seen, when properly understood, to be as simple as the passage of water through a sieve or of a gas through a liquid in some chemical experiment. Since it is possible by an alteration of vibrations to change matter from the solid to the etheric condition, it will be comprehended that it is also possible to reverse the process and to bring etheric matter into the solid state. As this one process explains the phenomenon of disintegration, so does the other that of materialization. And, just as in the former case, a continued effort of will is necessary to prevent the object from resuming its original form, so, in exactly the same way in the latter phenomenon, a continued effort is necessary to prevent the materialized matter from relapsing into the etheric condition. In the materializations seen at an ordinary seance, such matter as may be required is borrowed as far as possible from the medium's etheric double, an operation which is prejudicial to his health and also undesirable in various other ways. And this explains the fact that the materialized form is usually strictly confined to the immediate neighborhood of the medium, and is subject to an attraction which is constantly drawing it back to the body from which it came, so that, if kept away from the medium too long, the figure collapses, and the matter which composed it, returning to the etheric condition, rushes back instantly to its source. The reason why the beings directing a seance find it easier to operate in darkness or in very subdued light will now be manifest, since their power would usually be insufficient to hold together a materialized form, or even a spirit hand, for more than a very few seconds amidst the intense vibrations set up by brilliant light. The habitués of seances will no doubt have noticed that materializations are of three kinds. First, those which are tangible but not visible. Second, those which are visible but not tangible. And third, those which are both visible and tangible. To the first kind, which is much the most common, belong the invisible spirit hands, which so frequently stroke the faces of the sitters, or carry small objects about the room, and the vocal organs from which the direct voice proceeds. In this case, an order of matter is being used which can neither reflect nor obstruct light, but which is capable, under certain conditions, of setting up vibrations in the atmosphere which affect us as sound. A variation of this class is that kind of partial materialization which, though incapable of reflecting any light that we can see, is yet able to affect some of the ultraviolet rays, and can, therefore, make a more or less definite impression upon the camera, and so provide us with what are known as spirit photographs. When there is not sufficient power available to produce a perfect materialization, we sometimes get the vaporous-looking form which constitutes our second class, and in such case the spirits usually warn their sitters that the forms which appear must not be touched. In the rarer case of a full materialization, there is sufficient power to hold together, at least for a few moments, a form which can be both seen and touched. When an adept or pupil finds it necessary for any purpose to materialize his Maya Varupa, or his astral body, he does not draw upon either his own etheric double or anyone else's, since he has been taught how to extract the matter which he requires directly from the astral light, or even from the akasha. Another phenomenon, closely connected with this part of the subject, is that of reduplication, which is produced by simply forming in the astral light a perfect mental image of the object to be copied, and then gathering about that mold the necessary physical matter. Of course, for this purpose, it is necessary that every particle, interior as well as exterior, of the object to be duplicated should be held accurately in view simultaneously, and consequently the phenomenon is one which requires considerable power of concentration to perform. Persons unable to reduce the matter required directly from the astral light have sometimes borrowed it from the material of the original article, which in this case would be correspondingly reduced in weight. We read a good deal in theosophical literature about the precipitation of letters or pictures. This result, like everything else, may be obtained in several ways. An adept wishing to communicate with someone might place a sheet of paper before him, form an image of the writing which he wished to appear upon it, and draw from the astral light the matter wherewith to objectify that image. Or, if he preferred to do so, it would be equally easy for him to produce the same result upon a sheet of paper lying before his correspondent, whatever might be the distance between them. A third method, which, since it saves time, is much more frequently adopted, is to impress the whole substance of the letter on the mind of some pupil, and leave him to do the mechanical work of precipitation. That pupil would then take his sheet of paper, and, imagining he saw the letter written thereon in his master's hand, would proceed to objectify the writing as before described. If he found it difficult to perform simultaneously the two operations of drawing his material from the astral light and precipitating the writing on the paper, he might have either ordinary ink or a small quantity of colored powder on the table beside him, which, being already physical matter, could be drawn upon more readily. It is, of course, obvious that the possession of this powder would be a very dangerous weapon in the hands of an unscrupulous person, since it is just as easy to imitate one man's handwriting as another, and it would be impossible to detect by any ordinary means a forgery committed in this manner. A pupil definitely connected with any master has always an infallible test by which he knows whether any message really emanates from that master or not. But for others, the proof of its origin must always lie solely in the contents of the letter and the spirit breathing through it, as the handwriting, however cleverly imitated, is of absolutely no value as evidence. As to speed, a pupil new to the work of precipitation would probably be able to image only a few words at a time, and would, therefore, get on hardly more rapidly than if he wrote his letter in the ordinary way. But a more experienced individual who could visualize a whole page, or perhaps the entire letter at once, would get through his work with greater facility. It is in this manner that quite long letters are sometimes produced in a few seconds at a seance. When a picture has to be precipitated, the method is precisely the same, except that here it is absolutely necessary that the entire scene should be visualized at once, and if many colors are required, there is, of course, the additional complication of manufacturing them, keeping them separate, and reproducing accurately the exact tints of the scene to be represented. Evidently, there is scope here for the exercise of the artistic faculty, and it must not be supposed that every inhabitant of the astral plane could, by this method, produce an equally good picture. A man who had been a great artist in life, and had, therefore, learnt how to see and what to look for, would certainly be very much more successful than the ordinary person if he attempted precipitation when on the astral plane after death. The slate writing, for the production of which, under test conditions, some of the greatest mediums have been so famous, is sometimes produced by precipitation, though more frequently the fragment of a pencil enclosed between the slates is guided by a spirit hand, of which only just the tiny points sufficient to grasp it are materialized. An occurrence which occasionally takes place at seances, and more frequently among Eastern yogis, is what is called levitation, that is, the floating of a human body in the air. No doubt when this takes place in the case of a medium, he is often simply upborne by spirit hands. But there is another and more scientific method of accomplishing this feat, which is always used in the East, and occasionally here also. Occult science is acquainted with a means of neutralizing, or even entirely reversing, the attraction of gravity, and it is obvious that by the judicious use of this power, all the phenomena of levitation may be easily produced. It was, no doubt, by a knowledge of this secret that some of the airships of ancient India and Atlantis were raised from the earth and made light enough to be readily moved and directed. And not improbably, the same acquaintance with nature's finer forces greatly facilitated the labors of those who raised the enormous blocks of stone sometimes used in Cyclopean architecture, or in the building of the pyramids and Stonehenge. With the knowledge of the forces of nature which the resources of the astral plane place at the command of its inhabitants, the production of what are called spirit lights is a very easy matter, whether they be of the mildly phosphorescent or the dazzling electrical variety, or those curious dancing globules of light into which a certain class of fire elementals so readily transform themselves. Since all light consists simply of vibrations of the ether, it is obvious that anyone who knows how to set up these vibrations can readily produce any kind of light that he wishes. It is by the aid of the etheric elemental essence, also, that the remarkable feat of handling fire unharmed is generally performed, though there are, as usual, other ways in which it can be done. The thinnest layer of etheric substance can be so manipulated as to be absolutely impervious to heat, and when the hand of a medium or sitter is covered with this, he may pick up burning coal or red-hot iron with perfect safety. Most of the occurrences of the seance room have now been referred to, But there are one or two of the rarer phenomena of the outer world which must not be left quite without mention in our list. The transmutation of metals is commonly supposed to be a mere dream of the medieval alchemists, and, no doubt, in most cases, the description of the phenomenon was merely a symbol of the purification of the soul. Yet there seems to be some evidence that it was really accomplished by them on several occasions, and there are petty magicians in the East who profess to do it under test conditions, even now. Be that as it may, it is evident that, since the ultimate atom is one and the same in all substances, and it is only the methods of its combination that differ, anyone who possessed the power of reducing a piece of metal to the atomic condition, and of rearranging its atoms in some other form, would have no difficulty in effecting transmutation to any extent that he wished. The principle of sympathetic vibration mentioned above also provides the explanation of that strange and little known phenomenon called repercussion, by means of which any injury done to, or any mark made upon, the astral body in the course of its wanderings will be reproduced in the physical body. We find traces of this in some of the evidence given at trials for witchcraft in the Middle Ages, in which it is not infrequently stated that some wound given to the witch, when in the form of a dog or a wolf, was found to have appeared in the corresponding part of her human body. The same strange law has sometimes led to an entirely unjust accusation of fraud against a medium, because, for example, some coloring matter rubbed upon the hand of a materialized spirit was afterwards found upon his hand, the explanation being that, in that case, as so often happens, the spirit was simply the medium's astral body, or perhaps even his etheric double, forced by the guiding influences to take some form other than his own. In fact, the astral and physical bodies are so intimately connected that it is impossible to touch the keynote of one without immediately setting up exactly corresponding vibrations in the other. End of section 14.